mentioned that he is the expert in international trade, and in the present scenario, India, China, and all those, is very relevant person, very knowledgeable person, and I wanted the students and the faculty of liberal arts and Amity University to gain knowledge from him. So I welcome you again, sir, on this Amity University, and really thankful to you. And let me introduce Dr. Siddharth. He is also from JNU. He has done his PhD from JNU. Dr. Alka Parikh ma'am, she is the director of liberal arts, and she has done her PhD from Cornell University. And we also have other faculties like Kavaram Dore and Deepika Golotkar and Pandurang Sontake that I have seen. All those are their PhDs, and we really look forward to your lecture, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Arindar. And I can begin, I guess. So, should I begin?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. So, what I'll do is I will speak for about 30-35 minutes. And just because I've been tied up with so many of these online meetings of the university and other, and because of other, can you all hear me clearly? Can you all? Can't hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can.
Okay.
So I said that I've just been busy with online meetings and also other webinars, and I haven't had time to really prepare a PPT, which I normally like to do. But anyway, what I will do, I'll make some very simple points, and since this is a reasonably technical audience, I mean, at least they are reasonably educated audience, may not be all economists, don't have to be. I can speak at a level which is much easier. Okay, the topic which you sent me was economic revival after the pandemic. Okay, and I'll stick to that. So let me tell you, I will make basically, I guess, a number of points, but they fall into three areas. The first is, so where were we before the pandemic? You know, people have forgotten the pandemic is only 2 months old. Life existed before the pandemic. So I'm going to first argue that where were we before the pandemic? What did the pandemic do? Then what did economics tell us about the situation in these kind of pandemics? And finally, therefore, what is required for revival? It should be, by and large, roughly the 4 areas in which I'll keep my comments. I'm going to surprisingly tell you a lot more of part 4, and also about why I believe that the discussions around economists are unable to separate the discussions of economics in a pandemic from economics in recession. And I'm going to argue that those are 2 different things. And therefore, you cannot have the same solution for both. We say the same thing, but that's all we know. You know, like doctors, frankly, economists can never say, I don't know. And really, they should be saying, I don't know. But because we can't say, I don't know, we say, okay, this is what. And I'm going to say, please separate the economics of a recession from economics of the pandemic, which may or may not be the same thing. Okay. So my first point which I want to make is that you have to first reach February 2020. I mean, we've already gone into political discussions of 2008 and 2012. Let's forget about all that. We'll come to that. Let's first get back to February 2020 when this pandemic interrupted life. And then we can worry about the future and try to link it back to February of 2020 with March, April, May, maybe June being sort of dead months, a kind of a blank slate in a country's or world's future. I think that's the only way to handle this crisis and what we should do and what we should not. Now, first remember, prior to March 2020, and I'm not a political person, but you can take your other issues from that. Economy was on a downward situation anyway, and let me discuss that a little bit. Largely because of the overhang of the 2008 recession. Since 2008, as you know, 2008-2009 was the only recession we know of which we compared to the 1930 recession, because for the first time after many, many decades, world output actually fell roughly by about 1%, which has never happened before. It's not a question of not growing, but actually falling. It's a typical definition of a recession. It fell for 1 year, 2008, 2009, and it's been sort of stuck at the world output is sort of hanging in there. It's sort of not going down, not going up. It's staying constant, and it's not falling mainly because of two factors. One, the US economy has been growing at 2-3%, and some emerging countries like China was growing, India has been growing. There's some other like Philippines, emerging markets have been growing. Otherwise, we've been at standstill. Look at the few numbers. Merchandise trade has remained roughly about 60% of world GDP since about 2009. Hasn't changed at all. IMF and World Bank, these are two competing forecasts apart from a whole lot of others. And the IMF is always a little more pessimistic than the World Bank, or optimistic. World Bank, if the World Bank, both of them have been saying for the last 4 years, I know, they've been saying we are going to grow at roughly about 2 to 2.5%. And every year we actually come into world growth of about 1 to maybe 1.5%. So they've been consistently wrong in how fast we are going to grow because they don't know either. Okay, the only saving grace has been the 2-3% growth in the US, which was actually overheated economy in just prior to February of 2002. Let's look at India quickly. Let me explain, try to put some numbers to show this is not a normal state of economic affairs. Let's look at a few numbers. India's trade to GDP ratio was roughly about 49%, okay, in 2014, 43% in 2018. We know that, just one second, I'll call you later at the meeting. It was about 49% in 2014, 43% in 2018. Exports and imports were generally falling from 2011-12 onwards, except slight upturn from 2016 to 2018, and then we are back to that, neither growing nor falling, etc. Now look, let's look at why am I giving these numbers. Not for these few numbers I've given. 40% of your GDP therefore is not growing. If the world trade stands still, and 40% of your GDP comes through exports or imports, then 40% of GDP is not growing. So it is not surprising that expected growth rates of 4.5 to 5% should be, let's say, less than half, maybe 1. So we were not expecting, should not have expected more than 2-2.5% growth anyway. Because world trade in any case had been a standstill. And India sort of maintains this position. It does not significantly rise above the world growth rate, nor significantly fall below growth rate. I've done the numbers on that. So it is not surprising, it's not rocket science to say, well, I don't think the economy is going to be growing more than about 2 or 2.5%, 3%, because frankly, only 60% of the economy is growing. 40% is stuck where it is because world trade is not going. So it's not surprising to have expected a 2 to 3% GDP growth as compared to everyone forecasting 5, 6, 7, whatever. These are all political points. I don't want to get into that. Main point is, with a 40% of whichever number you look at, share of GDP, of trade to GDP, you cannot be dealing from world trade. That's the first thing, that we are not dealing from world economy. Okay. Then, second point I will make. When the world went into a downturn in 2008, why did the downturn in India start only in 2011, 12? I must admit, it's because, remember, we came into a really growing, we were a very fast growing economy in 2008. Please look at the numbers, 7-8%. Because the world economy was booming before 2008. So we boomed with them. And the government had a lot of money. Those of you who are my age group and maybe 5-10 years younger too, will know that was the time we got the largest of the 6 pay commission. Everyone got twice, 2.5 times their salaries. Largest of pay commission, then cut excise tax all around. Businesses were given huge rebates. I think Mr. Pranab Mukherjee was in the FM, because the country could afford it. We were in 2008 or 2009, where the US is today. A very fast growing economy. We could afford to do. Unfortunately, as a consequence of optimism and doing extremely well, we also did the rather mistaken thing of allowing a lot of what you might call doubtful bank loans. And then all these things kicked in after 2011-12, and therefore it's not surprising that the economy is being trending downhill. Just for the interest of those who are technically interested, I did a very technical forecast. It's an article published in the, I think it's April 2018 EPW, Economic Political, along with the physicist, Amity. Two of us did a forecasting, not the usual kind, so we don't know little high-level maths, then don't read the article. It is fairly complicated methods of using, it's called something called empirical, on some empirical mode decomposition method of predicting where the trajectory of growth looks like a sine curve. You cannot use standard normal techniques of forecasting using economics, but there are other methods. And we actually did forecast that from 2012 onwards, the GDP growth rate, the growth rate of IIP would be declining. Not surprising. And it's not rocket science, as I said. If 40% of GDP is stuck, how can you expect the rest of it to grow at, make the economy grow at 9%? Not possible. Okay, so the third point to make about the growth prior to, let's say, March 2020, one was, of course, the share of world trade. Second was that we were in a situation in 2008 where the USA is today, very buoyant, lot of money with the government, the rich government, and therefore would give out largest through excise cuts, salaries and all. The third point is the only thing which has been growing, and that's one of the things that has been keeping our external balance working, has been services growth. In fact, service trade, world trade in services, as distinct from merchandise trade, has been growing approximately 8% 2017 and 18, and slowing down to about 3% 2019, which is still way above world trade in merchandise trade. So it's only the service sector, which I don't want to get into, where we plugged into a big wave in the after 2009, which has been sort of keeping us going. The developing countries' share in world trade and services is roughly about 15%, which is huge. India itself, 3.5 to 4% in world trade in services. That's a huge number. Given that your share in merchandise trade, after almost 70 years, still trying to reach 2%. So that's really what's been keeping on. And now, so that's where we are in February 2020. Now let's come to today. The first point. Now, let me also mention, how does a crisis overflow? And I'm sure there's some economists here, and you all heard of Keynes, and you heard of Friedman and monetary economics. How does a recession okay, I'll come to it later. Let me first make my next point, third point. The first is to be able to reach February 2021. Second is the nature of the growth before 2000 and March 2020. Third point is this current crisis is not an economic crisis. Let me be very clear. I told you it's terrible for economists and doctors. Even doctors, frankly, should say we don't know. Some are honest ones are saying we don't know. The other are saying we know it will spread because it's a viral. This might work here, that might work there, but better still stay away from each other and try to ideas. Their solution to doctors is if each one of us could stop interacting with anyone else in the world, the pandemic would come to an end, but so would humanity. So that's not a very good answer for us technical, but they don't know. And there are some of them, frankly, who are saying we don't know, and I accept that. So this is not an economic crisis. Let me tell you why. In 2 months, for a growing economy like the US, booming, there was severe crisis of not enough people to do jobs in February 2020. Couldn't find people for jobs, such a problem. Today, we have 20 to 25% unemployment. That's impossible. No economic crisis unfolds like that. That one day you're up here and the next day you're back there. They're always cyclical like a sine curve. Why? Because everyone's expectations are never the same. That's what Keynes said. John Maynard Keynes taught us that people's expectations always vary. Some are over-optimistic. They are the ones in the stock market. Some are less optimistic. Some are extremely pessimistic. And there's a time when all the expectations catch up, and that's when the recession hits the floor. So everyone's expectation not the same, which is why it takes time. It happened in 1920s. It took about 2-3 years. There was a boom till 1929. Then the famous stock market crash there, more in the world market. Then, of course, the decline in outputs. And by 1933-34, 2-3 years is when the recession we find shows that the economy is hit a floor. Here in 2 months, outputs, world trade is down by 30%. Unemployment has gone up has reached 20-25% level even in economy like the USA. Now let me explain what the unemployment is. This is not the kind of unemployment in USA which you read about in Keynes. So you cannot suggest Keynes kind of solutions. What is this unemployment in the USA? It is those who have lost jobs, and I'll come to that later, and who are plugged into the unemployment insurance. Same in Europe. These are not what we call Keynesian unemployment. If you please remember your textbook definition, it is the people who are looking for jobs and are willing to work but not available. This is not those kind of people. And I'll tell you why the jobs are not available. It's not the Keynesian reasons why the jobs are not available. And I'll come to that. But these are people who have an unemployment insurance, and therefore they're quickly plugged into the unemployment insurance to make sure they have some income during the days when production has come to a stop. Okay, now first point I'm going to make is you will see similar numbers, right? CMI has said India is hitting 23. Of course they're hitting 23. Everyone's hitting unemployment rate. And why? Because what has happened? Let me take one more point before I get on to what has happened. So comparison of 2008 to the 1930 recession was justified. With the 2000 recession came after almost a decade, less, 5-6 years of breakneck growth, and then slowing down. It slowed down 2009, slowed down further, and slowly came to the typical Keynesian kind of demand recession, which is why countries like the USA, China, India to a certain extent, India, China, USA, other countries did pump priming. They pumped money into the economy to generate demand because they were in a Keynesian situation where unless the government acts, nothing will happen, and the countries will continue in unemployment equilibrium. But there was an unemployment equilibrium in 2002. There was an unemployment equilibrium in 1930s, not disequilibrium. Today we are not in an unemployment equilibrium, but an unemployment disequilibrium. And I'll come to that. So comparing today to any recession in 1930s is just a bankruptcy of thought, I think, frankly, for economists. Therefore, the conclusion I'm making is, on this point, there were fiscal and monetary things neither is going to help at the moment. To get us back to my point, let us get back to February 2020. Then we'll worry about how to move. None of this is going to get us back to February 2020 because the causes are not the usual causes we know. They are not due to monetary contraction. They are not due to excess liquidity, and they are not due to lack of demand. So that's the first point I'm making. Now, this is what I call the immediate crisis, the COVID crisis. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Now, the crisis today is not a failure of expectation. Let me put it another way. It's the failure of expectations which led to the recessions, always leads to recessions. It is let me again elaborate a little bit on Keynes. What Keynes said is, the expectations of consumers is that things are going to continue to be bad. The expectation of producers, well, let us not produce because there is no one to buy. It is not the failure of expectations because of reaching the peak of expectation. That's not what's happened. It's a failure of expectation because the government just said, stop everything, stop living. No production. Even if you want to produce, you cannot produce. It's true for India too, by the way, rest of the world. So you cannot produce, you cannot trade. Not because you don't want to trade, because, well, ships are not working, planes are not working, right? So you can't trade. Which is why you'll see that the service sector also has responded not as badly as the others to this crisis. All physical means of trade and commercial interchange have been stopped. But they have been stopped by government fiat, not by expectation on the part of either consumers or producers. So something which relies on failure of expectations due to the course of the economy, which is either fiscal or monetary policy, cannot be used to a situation where it's just someone saying, let's close down the economy, let's stop working for 3 months. No working. And that's, of course, what the COVID crisis has done. So, Why is India? So basically what has happened in terms of economics is both demand, individuals, and supply, production has been stopped. It has not come to a stop. It has been stopped. And that is not how usual recessions happen, where normal failure of expectations leads to slowing down of demand, which is followed by slowing down of production and then the feedback. This is not just a stoppage. Okay, why is India affected? Not in terms of medical issues, I'm not a doctor. It is affected even more because for us, physical distancing, which nowadays people like to call social distancing or social distancing, required that we had to separate production and consumption, because in India, labor is all productions invariably involved in the production process. We are a labor intensive country, right? So we produce labor intensive goods. Our production, our car companies use a lot of labor compared to car companies in most of the developed world. So we have to stop production if we want to have physical distancing. So because of the involvement of labor for correct reason is so high in the economy, this has also led to extreme distress for labor as compared to many of the developed countries. So our case, there was no possibility of having partial, there are two kinds of things which have been happening in many countries, including in Europe. One has been shut down and the other is lockdown. A shutdown means you cut activity to a certain level, but people are free to move and you can go ahead and, e-commerce, for example, continues in many parts of the world. India has a shutdown. So e-commerce also means interaction. Production by definition means interaction. Consumption by definition means interaction because we don't have that much e-commerce yet. E-commerce companies only account for 4 to 5, maybe 8% of demand. So therefore, you have to do a lockdown that no one moves. Only way to ensure that social distancing takes place is no one moves. And one way of ensuring no one moves is stop all consumption and all production except for two areas, medicines and food. Okay, now let's take same numbers I'm going to give for Indian case. Take Indian exports and imports. Indian imports of goods and services plummeted to almost zero in April 2020. 38% and 47% decline over 2019. If you look only at goods, if you look at goods and services. So 38% decline in exports in April 2019, 20 over 2019. 47% decline in imports 2020 April over 2019 April. 60% decline of both each. If you look only at merchandise trade, that's impossible. No recession sees such a dramatic change in a period of 2 months unless it has been physically prevented. This is not part of a natural decline of demand or natural failure of expectation on the part of producers. So world is shut down. World has ceased to trade within the country and within countries, and not surprisingly. So for example, if you look at evolution of recessions, economic recession, you look at the 1929 recession, you go back to the recession of 19th century, they never work like this. Sudden disappearance. I mean, here your trading has disappeared overnight. That is because the cause of this is not economic cause, and the cause is, okay. So, just one second. Hello. कौन बोल रहा है? हाँ बोलो. हाँ भेज दो. हाँ भेज दो. So you see the point I'm making. This is not an economic crisis. I'm going to go on and on and on because we hear every day economists saying, do that. The opposition says, oh, put money in the hands of people. And the others say, no, we will create the incentive for people to work. Neither is going to work because the cause is not a demand failure or supply failure. The biggest cause, of course, is what I've been writing endlessly on, at least wherever I wrote. The cause is fear. It's the fear of the unknown. And this fear of the unknown, frankly, has been a fault of the medical fraternity. And I'm going to spend another 10 minutes now on going back to why I make this point. I'll come back. Now, so as I said, I'm still saying, how do I get back to February 2020? Then we can deliberate whether we should use Keynesian measures or whether we should use monetary measures. Is the correct thing, the current set of 5 things which the government announced, these are perfectly okay things because they are doing what every country should do, developing country. Use a crisis to bring in reform. Because without crisis, you cannot reform this country. The way we are a democratic country with a lot of illiteracy, you cannot. So I think it's a great thing. I think institutions, I do plan, should also use this crisis to do things which you otherwise could not do because there's too much resistance. But anyway, but the point is, these are not methods to solve the fear crisis. The fear of producers and consumers staying away from each other, and consumers staying away from each other, producers staying away from each other, that fear is what is the problem in the global context, even more in the Indian context, because frankly, I believe fear has been engendered into people even more. And why is that? Because let me now quickly go to divert a bit from economics to a bit of not medicine, but some numbers. Let me read you. I started reading. The last crisis we had, a pandemic, was about a decade ago. We all heard about that. The famous swine flu, or some people call it the H1N1 flu. I'm going to read from some quotations from the period that time. Here's one from a journal very well known called Medical Express, May 9th, 2009. Sales of face masks are breaking all records, not only in Mexico, but also in Sweden. I've got huge quotations, I won't do this. Hotel guests are being isolated at a hotel in Hong Kong. And note the next. People with the sniffles are being isolated in airports around the world. Next. And here at least people are more honest though. It is difficult to predict what risks will have impact on public opinion. We don't know. If you live in a city, you will be more worried than if you live in the country, because density of population, therefore spread of virus is higher, which is true. And which is why I believe if this migration had taken place earlier, we'd be less worried. Now here's further quotation from that. A further explanatory factor is that the new influenza is also a risk that is rapidly amplified in society. This is done when the mass media, the general public, experts, politicians, and authorities draw attention to the risk in various ways. And the media has become such a big overhang today that the fear is not that you get the infection, but if you get an infection, then you will be imprisoned in something called the quarantine, and you might die. Both of which are completely false assumptions, even in a place like Mumbai, which is a much higher death rate. And I'm going to come to a number of things just to continue. October 24, 2009, Obama then declared national emergency. Let me mention the impact of that swine flu. 300,000 people died over a period of a year. And here, interestingly, 80% were below the age of 65 years. The conclusion then was, though the probability of elderly dying is more if they contract, but somehow they don't contract the disease. So here's a slightly different approach this time, that the elderly shouldn't vote at all. And I can tell you, they will ultimately conclude that the number of people who died are much larger in the middle age bracket, the 30 to 60. Why? Because the elderly either are probably more immune, except assuming you don't have any other diseases, or because they don't get out anyway, so they never contract the disease. Okay, let me come with some more numbers. According to CDC, which is the main Center for Disease Control, Atlanta, USA, April 2009 to 2010, 60 million people were infected in the USA. 250,000 hospitalized, about 15,000 deaths. The death rate is somewhat higher today. Let me come to India. Since we're in India, we should not forget about India. In the case of swine flu, in the first installment, 2009-10, most of us didn't even know it happened. We were still happy with the largesse and with the optimism of the budget and the fact that we still didn't know there was a world recession. So we were too concerned about whether China is going to overtake US. And there's so many other things to keep the media busy. We really didn't worry too much about swine flu. Ask yourself, if you were reasonably old that time, or your parents, how many of them even heard or knew there was an antidote called Tamiflu, and how many of them actually took that Tamiflu. you'll find very few. No hospitals closed in India, no education institutions closed, nothing closed down. Okay, let me mention for India, 180,000 cases, 3,000 deaths. We've forgotten completely that there was a swine flu which had a large incidence too. In 2015, which the swine flu came back, in India, 42,592 cases of infections, 2,990 deaths. 2012 to 2020 in India, 150,000 infections in general, 9,221 deaths. Incidence of swine flu was roughly about 6.2% compared to little over 3% in India, and little higher, about 2% or so in Delhi. The question is then, why did we react so much more? Are people more stupid today? Is that the reason? And I don't think that is a valid argument. I'm going to give you a number of figures which I spent yesterday getting. They're quite interesting. Why then have we reacted in this? Are governments crazy? They're not. Are we the only smart guys? And look at the social media. Problem was the social media is much more in your face today than it was in 2009, 2000. Then let me give you some numbers. In Facebook in 2004, I had just 1 million users. Twitter sort of debuted in 2006. In 2010, I think the first app came from Android phones. WhatsApp was inaugurated, sort of began some sort of use only in 2009. Instagram started first use in 2010. TikTok didn't come until 2016. Bandwidth, I'll tell you why it's important. First used in Sweden, Norway in 2009, 4G was first used. Today it's something which we automatically assume is on our phones. If you have a 2G phone, you can't use the most of these services today. 5G, South Korea only started using it in 2018. China is experimenting, other countries like India also thinking. So I'm just saying, the growth of the kind of media by which both news, fake and unfake, has moved instantaneously across the globe, forget about across countries. It's possible because of the growth of these various media. Sorry. Hello, my phone pay. If you don't have these various types of media, which I mentioned, Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, Instagram, oh, hello, then you see that, and on top of that, you have no 4G, so you really cannot transmit visual media. Any marketing person, management, you're a management school too, will tell you the most impactful method of propagating some idea is visual. Visual is first, second is reading, second is action, and third is reading. So there's a very well-known marketing phenomena that you go to a crowd and say, okay, now please touch your nose, and they'll all touch their ear, not their nose. Because they've heard you later, they've seen you first. So visual is the most important, sound is second, and reading is the third most important method of marketing. So we couldn't use visual. Now today we are so many, frankly here I believe the Chinese are severely at fault. If we had known what actually happened in Wuhan, we don't know. We got these images, I'm sure you all saw them. A man standing and falling dead. Police grabbing a person by a butterfly net and tying him in. You see, the fear psychosis was spread so quickly, both through false news, even in this migrant crisis. You can see how it has been the media which has brought to attention what actually happened. I'm not saying but they shouldn't. I'm just saying that governments, because they're democratic, are more and more driven by the media, although they should not be, but unfortunately that's how democratic. And it is the social media which has driven this. You can see the headlines. Peak of 5,000 cases today. If the number of tested have gone, then the number of people who are infected will also increase. That's obvious. If you stop testing, there will be no peaks. Suppose we all stop testing completely in India, then the number of infections will go down to zero. There will be no new cases. But that is very silly, right? We've learned in economics, it is margin which matter. The only statistic we should be looking at is how many new cases, how many recovered cases, and what is the death rate. That's the only thing. Instead of, papers now spreading the message that so many new cases, etc., etc., etc. Okay, let me give you a few more numbers. In 2010, only 11% of those over 65 who are very important media influencers used internet, compared to 35%, 3 times increased number over 65 who actually use social media. Similarly, the gap between the gender gap in use of social media, then the race gap or the religion gap, all these have narrowed. The greatest equalizer we've agreed today is the social media, but is also the greatest disseminator of information, sometimes very dangerous information. So in other words, in 2009, I hate to say this, ignorance was bliss. We didn't know. We didn't know what it was doing. We would go by friends, oh, have you been affected by swine flu? No. And you know anyone been affected? No. Okay, then let's carry on with whatever life we are leading. Unfortunately, that is the crisis that we are facing today, that now we are hit the point where the problem is not the economics. So when one side says, please give money, now let me tell you why I say all this. Let me give you something else which I wrote when I did some numbers. I did the numbers for the US economy. I said, so what is the total demand that is actually happening? And I said, let me give you the numbers. A report of the US Committee for Economic Development put the share of food and beverages in total personal income expenditure in the US around 10%. If we add this to other developed countries and say we add another 5 to 10% of expenditure on health, medical care, and it is reasonable to assume that 80 to 85% of world GDP has been expunged, because nothing except medicine and food can be exchanged or produced. So you've sort of extinguished 85% of production. You can add maybe, I don't think the numbers will be very different. So here is the point I'm making. Now let me start by, economics was always a science of introspection, which we put into formal theories. Suppose I was to tell you, let's start with you, Dr. Havildar. I now give you 1 lakh rupees every month. What are you going to do? Nothing. All you can do is force savings. You can't fly anywhere. You don't have any entertainment. There is nothing that you can do. You can only buy food and medicine. And people do not spend more than 20-25% of the income on food and medicine, except maybe at the lower income levels, where state health has been a very critical factor, which is why Kerala has outshone every other state in this country. It's only medicine and healthcare and food. And food also, as we now know for economics, is something whose demand is inelastic. You don't eat 15 chapatis just because you've got more money. Look at another way. Agriculture accounts for 14% of GDP. Let's add another 4 or 5% for process, so we have 20% GDP. Another 5-6%, again 25% or 20% GDP is actually working. The rest has been forced to shut down. So I only need to have 25% of GDP for my expenditure cycle to work. Adding more to that is not going to make any difference. Let me give you an example. Even before this crisis, you recall the government, and a good measure, as a reform measure, I'm talking about the crisis. As a reform measure, the government cut corporate tax rate to 15%. Did anyone in January and March start producing more? No. Businesses first will cut their inventories. Inventories are holding cost. People want operating capital because they want to at least meet their operating cost, which is maintaining inventories. So that's why the recent measure by the government of giving some money or collateral of loan to MSMEs is important, because MSMEs have the same problem as bigger firms, except their pockets are not deep. They still will not produce something when no one wants to buy it. At least since March. People may want to buy, you can't buy. So when the economy is not making anything, what is the point in pumping more and more money in the economy in any form if no one can use it? All that is happening for the upper class and middle class is forced savings. for the last 2 months. And for the poorer caste, they needed only enough money to tide over their rations, which many of them were getting free, and maybe rent. But the reason why they were running was not because of food, I'm convinced, because of fear. It is the fear which is making all of us not spend. It is the fear which is making us run from one state to the other, because we are convinced that we are all dead if we get this infection. And when fear is the cause, it doesn't matter all these economic solutions, government saying we'll give you this, opposition saying no, put money in their pockets. For what? Are people willing to now still go to the market to buy? No. Because if we told you better stay 4 meters or 3 meters or 1 meter from anyone else. And everyone in India knows it's not possible. Can you be 1 meter away from each other in Bombay? Then they might as well not run the train. I can understand why they didn't run the train. How is it possible to have 1 meter? Who will say, okay, you go because you're the last 1 meter person? Other countries don't have the crisis of numbers. You have the crisis of numbers. The bottom line is, as far as I can see at the moment, infection or no infection, virus or no virus, vaccine or no vaccine, unless a method can be devised of convincing people to get back to the economic marketplace. And the governments are never good handlers of distribution. In the 1970s, government tried to take over of food grains, wholesale trade in food grains, a complete failure. The government cannot handle the market method of distribution, whether it is of labor or whether it is of food. Unless the implied method, old method of distribution with some safeguards, and these safeguards have to be individual. After 2 months, 3 months, the government has to leave it to individuals. They cannot have police regulated methods of physical control. It will not work, cannot work. It will be misused, and the end result will be that no one will come. Now in Delhi, at least I know most people are still not going to the market. They're saying, बहुत दिन के बाद खुला अभी भीड़ होगी, एक हफ्ते के बाद जा रहे हैं. Now think of it this way: everyone has the same fear. If everyone does the same, 1 month later, everywhere there will be a rush in the market. So, look at the other thing where I think the governments are wrong. They are saying let's open up methods of travel in segments. That's even worse. Because if you open up markets for small periods of time, there will be greater rush. If you once you've decided to open the markets, let it be open for the normal time. If you open up like in Delhi, you see most countries, cities have this curfew states from 7 a.m. to the national thing, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. What does that mean? If you go to work, then you better be rushing out in time to get whatever you have to get and get back, because 7 p.m. is curfew. So there will be greater concentration of people. So you have to see that you have to give people as much time as possible to be able to do social distancing. You only have time, that's all you have in a day. So I don't understand why can there be no shopping at 9 o'clock at night? Let people go at 9, let them go at 10. Because then I will try to at least go to a market, say, okay, it's crowded, I'll come back later. We do it all the time. All the time we go to a market and say, oh, it's too crowded, let me go back, I'll come later. But now you can't. Because 7 o'clock, the whistle will blow and everything has to close down. Same thing, you cannot open one mode of transport. Take the Delhi, don't blame them. They are also being cautious. They are also people like you and me, not wanting to blame for something which is not their fault. But that's how democracy works. Look at the system of saying that now people can only move in their private cars, no buses, no autos, no two-wheelers, one person, and no trains. Then obviously everyone is going to concentrate and use more cars than before. I don't understand. If distancing is the objective, then look at distancing. Let distancing be the only factor, not how many cars on the road. If there are lesser cars on the road, it's good for the environment. But if you limit the number of people to 1 in a car or 2 in a car, then there will be more cars on the road. Unless you allow alternative modes, which now they're opening up, at least in Delhi, autos can move and Uber can move, and soon I'm sure they'll allow metros to move. Same problem. Same thing, not allowing interstate movement. I mean, we are becoming like Federation of States. So Goa is saying, someone from Karnataka says someone from Goa can come to Goa. I've seen, by the way, I've seen notification. I'm not exaggerating. Someone from Goa can come to Karnataka and not have to go through home quarantine because they are COVID free, as long as they get a certificate from the commissioner saying that they are permanent residents of Goa. But someone from Bombay will have to go to quarantine. So look at the travel. The travel that's happening through trains, interstate, is only the stop of migrants, rich or poor, getting out to wherever they came from. There will be no flow. Because imagine me wanting to thinking that Goa is COVID free. Let me go to Goa. First, I spent 14 days in quarantine in Goa. End of holiday, I come back and again spend 14 days quarantine in Delhi. So my 1 month goes only in quarantine. So no resident who's working and settled in any city will ever travel by any mode of travel till this quarantine business goes. It'd be silly. You spend 1 month out of the whole thing. So only those on postings, those who are migrants, workers, whether rich or poor, doesn't matter. They are the only ones who are using these forms of transport. So everything is linked. You cannot change one and expect the other to deliver. The more they open up modes of transport, the lesser will be the pressure on either trains or on buses or on cars or on autos, etc. But opening up one after the other is only showing their own sense of uncertainty, which I don't blame them. But my bottom line with which I want to end is, and I'll take question of course, that this is not, COVID crisis is not an economic crisis. It's a crisis of fear. It's a crisis of fear which only governments must stop making every new thing in the crisis something where public address is required. Like the CM saying, now I'm going to tell the people what's happening. People know what's happening. Let the normal course of life begin. The normal statistics which are there for any other disease, let them come. Because the next crisis you're going to have is all the hospitals will close down. At least the ones in Delhi are all going to close down because they don't have enough COVID patients and the non-COVID patients can't go. And then you'll have the same crisis which came up, which is now arising, that the number of other things, people are more likely to die of other causes, which they should not have died of, than of COVID, which they may not have died of. So the probability of dying of any medical thing may actually increase, because your probability of dying through an infection in coronavirus is less. But the probability of dying if your kidneys don't get dialysis or if you don't get treatment for diabetes 2 is pretty high. So the probability of dying will actually increase. And you might have, so for better or for worse, I know it's a nice thing which people are saying, but now it's becoming hopefully a slogan. Live with the crisis, live with the virus. It's around. It's around like any other virus. And we always know a virus as something which is not a bacterial infection, where we don't know why it happened, but we know that if you're a reasonably resistant person, it will go away over time. Maybe because of built-in resistance, etc. But that is the crisis which we must address in the moment. And economic crisis is really not the one to worry about. Let me end with a very contrary view, to which I will say I believe like that, but I don't think I have any evidence. If your crisis is a V crisis, not like the usual U crisis of recessions, then the response will be also like V. That the bottom of a V is only one. The bottom of a U can be pretty long. And therefore, I believe that think of a cancer patient who's told, and I'm going to stress on this fear theory. Think of a cancer patient who's been told, you've got only 10 days to live. And then on the 7th day, he is told, well, no, you're wrong. You actually have got 7 years to live. And what will you do? He'll stop handing out his money to all his relatives. He'll stop trying to sell off whatever you say and live actually much better than he actually lived. You know, if you the hope of life will make people spend even more. I sincerely believe if this fear goes and this hope of life comes to people, the world as a whole, not just India, might well find this a good way of getting over the long-run economics position that we were stuck in. Thank you. I'll stop there. Any questions?
Yes, sir. We have two questions. The first one is from Havaldar, sir. He asks, will China lose its status of superpower in the future?
Well, let me answer this question. China never had a status of superpower anyway. I'll tell you economic superpower. Let me give you the numbers. Again, I always give numbers before February 2000. China grew. Let me tell you the story of China. A country which did not trade till 2017 and 18, almost zero, becomes a major trade power in the important trade power in the 80s. By 1990s, it is a world trade power. No case in history of a country going from no trade, not just no trade. There was this cultural evolution of people are told, forget all production, go to villages and work. From that, you come back and you conquer the issue of logistics and trade and finance in a period of 1 decade. Impossible. They were just a replacement. China to me in 1990 was just Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, etc. doing trade by other means because they had lost GSP status to the other countries. So having said that, the next bout of great growth in China comes in the period after 2000, mainly because the build-up to the 2008 Olympics in China. And China was buying raw materials, etc. at breakneck speed. You look at all the BRICS countries, what were they exporting to China up to 2000? Only raw materials, including Latin America. Only raw materials, iron ore. India was doing the same. They were trading among themselves, but with China, they were only supplying raw material. And that whole thing disappeared in 2008, and we had the commodity crash in the world market, 2009, 2010. So, at the best of times, China has never commanded more than 10% of world GDP. So I don't see, compare that with the other, we may, sometimes you have to hate, you may hate them, but you have to admit the facts. The USA has always commanded 20 to 25% of world GDP. It's consumption which matters. China has been a big producer. It has been the assembly line for the world. All South Asia, East Asia sends inputs, technology to China, where it is assembled and exported to the West. That has been the pattern from 1980 onward. Nothing has changed. So China has never been an economic superpower, first of all. They've been an economic production power, but they've never been an economic consumption power, ever. That has always remained with the USA, and before that, one time with Europe. So that is, first of all, the first question. China was never the superpower that we claim it is. So will they replace? I think this COVID has brought them out in a bad light. Because notice, what they could have done, which most of us did not because we wanted to, but we have no option, our media is so free. You may not, government may not want anyone to know that migrants are, inundating Rajasthan. But what to do? The press burger is standing at the border. He will transmit it with social. You can't do anything. Very difficult to restrain information. But they did. We had no idea what was happening in Wuhan. But people dying, not dying. People were sending NASA flights trying to look at. I saw something where someone said, oh, we saw these urns outside people's houses, which are normally kept to keep ashes. Can we access cremation records, burial records of Wuhan? Could they access? You can see, Delhi has been, people have said Delhi has been claiming the death rate is too low. They've collected their own records. And now Delhi is saying, let us reconcile. That 1.3 may become 2%, frankly, not more than I don't see how that's possible. So there are checks. So they are not to be trusted. I mean, I think the problem with the Chinese is not to be trusted. Because the Chinese have never wanted to integrate with the world. The most arrogant and racist class in the world is the Han Chinese. Japanese too, but it doesn't matter. It is a democratic one. The Han Chinese have never wanted to integrate with non-Han Chinese ever. There are many people have said that is why they didn't go further than Tezpur Assam. They didn't really want to integrate the Assamese into the Chinese economy because the Assamese or Nathalis were not Han Chinese. Just to make a point for India. They came on their own, went on their own. So it's an arrogant race. They are very hard workers. That is why they are the production superpower of the world today. But production superpower is not enough. You've got to be a consumption superpower too. Look at China. Today it has over $3 trillion reserves. The next to that comes at about 1 trillion, little less. All there, about 50-60% of world reserves. in trade, what is a continued trade or reserve balance mean? That you're buying less from the world than you're selling to the world. That's what it means. Whether it's financial services, commodity, doesn't matter. In the long run, this is an imbalance. That means you're holding back purchasing power from the world. And they've never wanted to be consumers. They've always wanted to. And their whole experiment has worked on the basis of people making a lot of money in exports. But at some point of time, when China called, USA called that gambit, said, well, you are doing a good job producing, how about now consuming a little bit? So I don't think they ever were in danger of becoming a superpower. I think this crisis, because of where it originated, whether you call it Wuhan or not, is going to make people a lot more suspicious. I think therefore whatever little chance they had of becoming a superpower, that is gone for some time. Yes.
Yes, sir. The next question that we have is from Kaustov Das. He is a student of BA Political Science. His question is, will the citizens need to adapt towards the working style and requirements of digital businesses and do away with the other traditional businesses in the post-COVID period?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Digital business is always been done as a cost-saving measure. It is never, as long as the cost of labor is less than the cost of digital transactions. You can see your monetary transactions. Right now, most of us are very happy to do online transactions, let's say bank transfers. Those of us, of course, who do online banking, because the cost of bank transfer is zero. Hello. The cost of bank transfer today is zero, whether it's RTGS or anything. The day they put in a cost, I'll be thinking twice. Go back to monetary economics. Why do I hold money? Transaction demand, precautionary demand, and speculative demand. You eliminated all three. So there's no reason for me to hold money. But tomorrow you bring back the transaction demand for money, that someone says, look, I don't want rupees. In New York today, can you pay for any street vendor by checks? No, you have to pay cash. So here even the street vendors are being paid by Paytm because Paytm will also be made free. But at some point of time, someone will have to pay for that. So I don't think so. I think digital, where it's creating efficiencies, may be possible. But there's a lot of dangers. It has to be very careful. Digital production, or if you want to call it capital intensive production, let me put it this way, has always come in response to high labor costs. If it comes in response to a medical crisis, it can only remain, the company doing that can only be cost effective as long as the medical crisis as a fear remains. The day that goes, the company will never be cost effective because labor is always cheap. And the danger of replacing all labor transactions with non-labor means of communication can be very dangerous. Think of eliminating all intermediaries between a consumer and the producer. Your service economy will come back this time to hit you in the cities. So, these things all happen in response to economic incentives. It is probably not wise to disturb it too much. Some efficiency gains, I think, are like in universities, and in offices. Methods of transaction which unnecessarily create intermediaries would be a good thing to eliminate. But to eliminate intermediaries who are always there can be very dangerous. So I don't think so, no. Let me put it this way, in education, will online education be number one? Let me answer that. Why isn't it already today? In most developed countries, online education has always been around for the last 20 years.
Right.
And why shouldn't, let's just say you agree that Harvard is the best MBA. All the others should close down. Harvard runs an MBA, everyone in the world can do it. There can be 1 million students. And then Harvard simply sublets the correction work to faculty in different universities. Why can't we do that? Why didn't it happen? Because I don't know how to cut the story short. If you go into the theory of why a firm exists, you get an answer to that. Oliver Williamson wrote a lot about this. It is a question of transaction cost. What is cheaper transaction cost? Is the online transaction cheaper method of doing it, or having people working for you cheaper method? Why should Amity University exist? Why don't they let IFT hire all the students? We'll send the correction work to you. You don't have to advertise anything. No work, don't need any faculty. Only Mr. Hawala needs to be there to call people and to correct. Why don't you do that? Ask yourself this question. and you get the answer as to will online education be the thing of the future, I would say no. Because it's not the thing of the future anywhere in the world, let me tell you. In developed countries, it is in response to the cost of staying in some of the big metros and the cost of transaction. It is not because of this. As I said, this is a medical crisis. You've got to get over the medical crisis. If the medical crisis doesn't go, so we'll all be dead, so it doesn't matter anyway. If the middle class disappears over time, then we'll get back to normal. Maybe 5 months, but never will digital transaction be the method because it's in response to a medical crisis. Yes.
Yes, sir. The next question is from Dakshesh Joshi. He is asking, how will being Atmanirbhar and initiatives like Make in India help us revive the economy, and how will it affect the trade?
Okay. First of all, I think I forget, was the PM or someone else who himself has clarified that Make in India does not mean made by India. Two different things. Idea is, can we bring some of the processes? See, every product in the world, and there's no exception. You show me one which is an exception. Every product in the world is part of a supply chain. With declining tariffs around the world, and with declining communication costs, shipping, for example, costs less than 3% or 4% of the final price of commodity. So so people have been willing to spread up processes depending on which country does what best. That's how supply chains do. And China was part of a supply chain from East Asia, South Asia to the developed world. So not something only China did. Question is, which of these supply chain things can we bring to India? That's the question we are actually grappling at the moment. And I don't think you're going to bring in processes which were not competitive earlier. For example, are we going to make our own chips? We'll be stupid. Should we start making our own computers? There are only two companies, Intel and 2, 3 others. We'll be foolish. Because the price of chip is so low, why would you want to reinvent the wheel? But can you bring in more processes which go into a mobile phone making into India? Certainly you can. So the question really is, why were supply chains certain processes which could work in India? Why were they being located in other parts of the world? That's the question to ask yourself. And now coming from what does Make in India mean? I think the crucial thing in Make in India is foreign direct investment. I remember writing in my book, FDI book of, I think it was 2015, FDI in India, Policy Responses, etc. It's a Springer book. It's a black, what is that? Black, forget the name of it. Anyway, it's a 2015 book. When I said the game changer for India can be some major things. And what is defense production? Why? Because defense production today, the offset policy says that at least 33% of production of all expenditure on imports should be respent in India. That's part of the defense offset policy. So if you are buying, let's say, $10 billion, that $3.5 billion have to be spent on India. And the big battle for the last 5, 6 years, 10 years now has been, so tell us what we can buy. And there it is, no, but you must buy things related to defense sector. But no one makes things related to defense. Can we buy computers? No. Only the computers being used in defense production. But there is no defense production. So there's a catch-22. So every time producers would come to, sellers would come to India and say, look, give us a little more time. So this Make in India initiative to invite more foreign investment is a very crucial thing, and I believe it can be a game changer in the next 3 to 5 years for India. Let me tell you why. There are two parts of trade. One is the commodity production and the other is technology. One thing I can tell you, all empirical work in economics has shown the most important determinant of trade is technology. It is not labor cost or resources as you may think. And those of you technically interested, I will refer to you 1995 paper by Daniel Tressler, TRESSLER in the American Economic Review, where he has shown, and he's done a lot of other work after that. Treffler, sorry, not Tressler, Treffler, Daniel Treffler, TREFLER, 1995 AER. And what is shown is that the countries which are major owners of resources, but not necessarily those which are largest exporters of products which use the resources. The one few exceptions are natural resource like coal, otherwise not true. So just because you are a tin producer doesn't mean you will be the major exporter of products which use tin, because you don't have the technology to convert tin into products. So technology or Ricardian theory is far better predictor of trade than the Hedgehow theory, if you want to use economic jargon. So Make in India, if it encourages foreign investment, and it really doesn't do it at the moment, but they're getting there. A lot of changes have taken since 1990. Very interesting point. Despite different political systems, Congress party, then there was a Khichdi in the middle in the 90s, with at one point even the left being in government, and then BJP came back, and then the Congress is back, and now the BJP is back. One thing that's never happened: no notification liberalizing foreign direct investment procedures has ever been reversed, even in the days when the left has been controlling. So it is something which has persisted. There has been continuous reform of foreign direct investment, because I think it was recognized way back in 91 that foreign direct investment is another way of doing trade. It is not something different. It's the same thing. Trade is commodities or services. FDI is a combination of technology, commodities, and services. Everything put into one. It's intra-firm trade as compared to inter-country trade. So to the extent that Make in India and this Atmanirbhar, etc., actually promotes FDI, I think they will get to it in a good way. It is not, but if Make in India is supposed to be import substitution and keeping out imports at any cost whatsoever, it's a very bad idea, and we'll pay very heavily for that.
Yes, sir. Deepika ma'am has a question that shall we restart the economy immediately, and how?
I just answer that. Get back, allow production, leave it to companies to figure out. They are also worried about it. Why does anyone think only the government is worried about us dying? We also worried about dying, right? You don't have to tell me, listen, please don't do this, you might die. I'm also worried about it. You have told me enough so far. All the doctors have told me. Aside, I'll say, frankly, leaving the running of an economy to any technical people is a very bad idea. Leaving it to doctors is the worst idea that I can think of. Not because they are bad, because a specialist doesn't understand other issues. So here, very simple. Get back to normal. You do the usual things you don't do, shouldn't do. Go back to a previous case of pandemics, right? Go back to the swine flu. You had one in 2009 and then the Indian one. What did you not do? Why is it that countries like South Korea did not have such a problem? Because South Korean Chinese, for reason, they are scared of pollution. They are convinced the pollution is going to kill them. So they've been wearing masks anyway for the last 10 years. It is a way of life in most South Asian countries, at least East Asian countries. South Korea, Japan. And that's why they were affected least, because they were naturally distancing. So keep distancing, leave it to individuals to distance. The spread of the virus so far has shown that there are no major medical issues, no one is dying of it. You don't need to close down hospitals just because there's a COVID patient. Or for example, there is 10, 20 patients in Dharavi slum, so whole of Bombay is closed down. I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? If there's someone has a cancer in one part of the institute, doesn't mean you close the whole institute down. This is the most foolish thing I've heard of. It's again playing safe, where the alternative is death, which I believe it wasn't, but we were led to believe it was. When the alternative was death, then everything is all right. But now we know that the alternative isn't death. And therefore, get back to normal. Follow the usual precautions that people tell you. Let me take you to a crisis which is not viral, but which is important. Remember the plague of the early part of this century in Surat? One thing that survived in Surat, I haven't been there recently. They remained a clean city. Surat, I still remember the plague, it never came to Delhi, of course. But the plague made Surat realize that the municipal commissioner was more important than the very local MLA. Because you are the man who ensured the city is clean. So if this crisis can help us become a clean city and for political reasons not create slums in urban areas, maybe that one big method will be solved. Or as people discover, well, the environment has certainly been a big improvement. So like Delhi, for example, why should we not continue odd even traffic without saying, okay, exemption for women, exemption for Sikhs, or not Sikhs, exemption for women, then exemption for this, exemption for that. No exemptions. Odd even means simple. Odd even, if you have an office car which is odd, then you either club with a guy who's even or find some other car with no exemptions. Delhi odd even failed because of all the exceptions, political pressures. Maybe this will help. As I said, use the crisis. Bring in odd even. Bring in the fact that you better stand in line or we'll shut down the trains. You know who are the most, and a slightly jocular vein, who are the most best well-behaved people? If you give them the same outcomes as before, those buying alcohol. Those buying alcohol never break social protocol in lines. If you give them enough outlets, if you don't give them outlets and say you have 3 days, maybe it will close, maybe it will not close, and bars may or may not open, then they will all rush at one time. Let liquor shops be open like they were earlier. And I'm glad Mumbai has done so. Forget about the income part. They are the most well-behaved. If you make it clear that if they are not well-behaved, no one will be served, watch even the most drunk alcoholic will stand in line. Stand in queues, we Indians are famous for not being, you know who the other people who just can't stand in queues like us? Maybe it's the number Chinese. They just can't stand in line. They make so much noise at airports, they push and there's a herd mentality. 20 Chinese is like, well, I won't say anything more than that. There's communities in India who behave the same way. But if you can learn to stand in queues, if you can learn to be cleaned, washing hands is something we've always been told to do, right? Now, if the crisis can make us bring in normal issues of hygiene, I think that's all. But having to shut us down from all activity because we don't practice hygiene, that is, throwing the baby out of the bathwater. So yes, I think get back to normal life and open up gradually over time. Yes.
Yes, sir. Rishabh Pandey has a question. How well do you think is India placed to attract manufacturing into the country after this recent anti-China sentiments? And the second half is also, what reforms could be expected to come up through production-linked incentives?
Shubham, you can also unmute Alka ma'am in case she has any question. Indirectly.
I think Alka ma'am will have to try to unmute herself because I'm having some trouble from this end.
Right. Yes.
Okay, let me answer the question on the production. See, ask yourself this question. Because again, this COVID has thrown our thinking a little off. Ask yourself this question. Why were we not the manufacturing capital for the world? Why is our manufacturing output being stuck at 25% of GDP? And agriculture at 15%, and therefore the rest is all services. Because we have lacked the physical infrastructure. Whether it is the doing business in India, which the government has been making a lot of efforts, frankly, they've been doing a lot. But in all state governments, and that is also a difficult thing to do always. But the infrastructure is the most important factor as far as manufacturing. And the government does seem to be paying enough attention. I mean, I think their work on infrastructure in terms of roads has been unparalleled. Whatever be your political affiliation, what they have done in terms of infrastructure on the roads, I have seen myself. It has no other government has ever come anywhere near it. It's quite amazing. So the infrastructure has been the biggest constraint. These two things, government procedures and infrastructure. Now these two things, this government seems to be indicating, yes, we are trying to reduce this. That will determine manufacturing. Is it going to happen overnight? No. Because manufacturing requires getting back into the world logistics chain. We are already very good. Look at what our major exports are. Machine tools, that's one. The other is pharma. Pharma, we will do what we are doing. We are the largest. We cannot become the number one. We are the number 4 in value, volume, and number 14. Very high. But look at can we replace China? It's slightly, I think we should attempt to. But can we do it? Can we do it in 2021? No. And I'll tell you why. Just look at the numbers. I don't have them here. Just look at the numbers. The exports of China to the US in 2019 are more than India's combined exports. If you take the top 5 exports of China, they're more than India's total exports in the world. Can we suddenly change? So I think the process which the ministry has been following was sometimes a good process. They have been following the process of saying let's isolate leaders. So let's think of 5 or 6 particular areas that we want to focus on, maybe 8 areas. And I believe many of these winners will have to be services, not necessarily only manufacturing. Service is something where we can move very far ahead because we've done it without too much government interference. So if the government does something positive, it can't make it worse. But I believe in the others, we'll have to think of 4 or 5 products. And I believe looking at existing exports and promoting them, rather than only thinking of what we can do, what China has been, that's not such a good
idea. Right. Shubham, are there any other questions?
Yes, sir. There are quite a few questions.
Yes.
So,
just one time.
Yes.
Shubham,
yes, ma'am.
I think we should stick to the time also,
Yes.
because we should allow him to go at 1 o'clock because we cannot be taking too much of the time of the speaker.
Right.
Sure, ma'am.
Right,
Sure,
ma'am. Ma'am, do you have anything to?
Just do 1 or 2 questions, but
Yes.
those will be the last 1 or 2 questions.
All right.
Okay,
So Shubham, the ones that you have right now are the last bunch of questions. Then we can take a question from Alka ma'am, and then I think.
Okay, sir. So I'll just ask one more question from here.
Yes.
This is from Sumit Desai. He's asking, can sir reflect his opinions on India's stimulus package? Even an overview will be fine.
Okay, I think I would view the stimulus package not necessarily, except for a few issues, those regarding migrant workers and those regarding Manrega, because many migrants, they have concentrated on the actual cash outflow, frankly, is restricted to those areas where these people are going to go back and they would need something there. Manrega is one, there are other methods also. Then there are these MSME methods. The collateral, 100% collateral loans, very important, at least operating loans, maybe the MSMEs can use and not get over the fact that for them the market is completely disappeared overnight. Maybe they can substitute for operating profits, and operating costs, banks may now be willing to give them that because the government is providing collateral. Apart from that, I see the rest of the them as reform measures, which I think is correct. If they didn't do it now, then once we are out of the crisis, we'd have got into discussions of politics and then everyone saying, who handled the crisis when? Why did we have a lockdown? Should we not have had a lockdown? Why didn't we? So there'll be so much political discussion around this. And I can bet you it's all going to be around the migrant. Everyone is abused the other of misleading migrants, but actually the country as a whole failed the migrants, not any particular. But to avoid that, it's best to get into some reform. And I think I see these reforms as a way forward. Whether it is the government, I think the government is wanting to get out of areas where they should not be. The government should not be in the business of business. They've been saying this for a long time. I think this is the first time I see that they actually are putting measures. And I welcome them as reform measures, which were required. But I don't think they are the issues as far as just getting out of the crisis. So, you have to separate the economic questions, extremely useful reform measures. Some I may not agree with, some I may agree with. By and large, I think I agree with them. I don't think getting out of education is a very smart thing to do. I don't think private sector can handle education in developing countries. One simple reason. Worldwide data shows that 95% of innovations, application invention to the marketplace come from inventions in public sector universities. And I'm talking about the best, highest innovating R&D country in the world, USA. 95% of their inventions are discovered in universities, not because someone's going to make money out of it, although that's changing now, but because, someone had to get this wonderful paper published in Nature, which he knew would give him tenure. So research is something which I believe is a major casualty, I'm sorry to say, in private universities, because the focus on making quick money, and there's nothing wrong with they would cost. Only the government can afford to lose money on education to more on R&D, and therefore I believe that getting out of higher education completely for the government is not such a smart thing to do from the point of view of R&D, etc. That's my view on education. But otherwise, I always believed, I've written a paper about this at least about 15 years ago. And I've traced the history of China, Japan, and South Korea and economics. I said the ultimate solution is what neoclassical economics says. Government should only be doing two things or one thing, providing public goods. Government is not the business of making profits. If the government is making profits, then why are they taxing you? So government is only in the business of providing those things which our market would not deliver, which the market signal would not provide, and that is education and health. If I have TB, I can hurt the whole world, like the expenditure which is going on now on this COVID. It's a public health. Can you imagine leaving it to only the private hospitals to solve the problem? We'll all be dead by now, or at least convinced that we'll be dead. So it's very important out of health and education, apart from these two, the government needs to get out of. I don't even know, except for countervailing power, why we don't have more private sector banks. Why are there so many public sector banks? They can have a few as a countervailing power, not to allow the private sector to misuse the market. Markets can be misused also, we all know that. But except for that, I think, therefore, so I view these what you called national. There is a political slogan, which is what you just said, Atmanirbhar. That is a good slogan, nationalism. That has been the slogan. That's all right. But nationalism cannot mean closed economy. Otherwise, you're a dead economy. So nationalism, as long as it means promoting efficient Indian production, nationalism in the sense of promoting the market and why the government should get out of area should not be certainly welcome. I view it in that light. Yes. One last question.
Alka ma'am, maybe.
Yeah, no, I don't have any questions. So I just wanted to say, Dr. Pant, that it was a really nice talk, and you articulated your points extremely well. I mean, I think most of the economists are on the same page as you, which I'm sure includes both me and Dr. Hawaldar. But most importantly, the articulation of those arguments was something which was very impressive. And so I really enjoyed your talk. And if any of my other fellow faculty members, which is Dr. Pandurang or Dr. Nandini or Dr. Siddharth, if they have, or even Dr. Munmai, anybody who has any questions, just one more question by the faculty, I guess.
Sir, I have one question. See, keeping under the mind that we are entering into new normal, the way the pandemic has spread across the world, and the vaccine is far away from getting invented. Still there's a lot of time for it to come in market. So keeping that in mind, how do you see the situation of unorganized sector in India and the labor classes to be trained into this new normal?
Okay, that's a good question actually. One of the things we've resisted for political reasons, that's where the crisis again should be used. Any attempt to make India's informal sector, I always tell people say India is a country with a lot of unskilled labor. I said that is completely wrong. India is a country of no skilled labor. I'll tell you a small story. I have a lot of friends and relatives in the film industry. And there was a point at one time, that's I'm answering you indirectly. There was a point at one time where the film city said Bombay is getting too expensive. Let's look at Noida, film city Noida, right? And that experiment lasted for maybe a year and disappeared. Today, film city only has news. Everything is back to Bombay. So I asked someone, and what the hell happened? You guys spent so much money in film city. Why the hell did you go back again to what's that area, wherever beyond, why do you go back to Bombay? And as you see, the problem in Delhi, there are no skills. If you want, he says in Mumbai or Bombay is a much better name, by the way. Anyway, if in Mumbai, you ask a person to write a script on Sita, on the Sita Swayamvar, he or she will write only that. In India, you ask someone to write a script, they'll say, if you want, I can also do the lights. If you pay me a little more, I'll also buy the tents. If you pay me a little more, I'll be a spot boy. So there's no specialization. So in India, this labor is informal sector is unskilled.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried to call an unskilled electrician? Sometimes he is very low cost, but he does so much. He spreads so much dirt all over the house that you end up doing more work yourself. Because half times let me do it myself. If this crisis can be used to realize that informal sector may mean someone, the unskilled worker is someone who can do a repetitive task extremely well. It's like today, if you have a company which installs something and you ask the company man to come to your house, and this, by the way, is true anywhere in the world, then the company guy is extremely efficient. He will not say, "Aap tauliya hai, do you have a kapda, do you have a little oil, do you have a screwdriver?" 20 things they ask. That is unskilled. That is skillless. So if this crisis can be used as a method of educating the unskilled, what is called skill formation. Skill formation doesn't necessarily mean, because skill formation doesn't mean higher education. Skill formation means learning to do a repetitive task extremely well. If I'm a guy who works in the gas industry, there's nothing about the gas industry I do not know. If I'm a guy who works in a company which delivers, let's say, gas ovens, then I should know gas ovens backwards. But I don't need to know microwaves. That's not my job. So that's what unskilled. So this crisis can be used of converting the informal sector into an unskilled sector. I think we'll go great way forward. China had did it. China did that. And maybe that's what we can learn. But the Chinese didn't do it on their own. The Hong Kong guys taught them how to do it. So that's way of foreign investment. Maruti has done that. Automobile industry today is extremely competitive in the world market. Nothing the government did. They just followed world practice. The whole point of becoming part of the world chain and not becoming nationalist in the sense we make everything without reference to anyone else is because you learn efficient methods of working. And that means not only in terms of skills, but in terms of labor organization. So if this crisis can be used to convert to labor in that way, I think that will be a great idea.
Right. I think that's about it. Havaldar sir, would you like to say something?
He can give the vote
Yes,
of thanks,
vote.
Professor Havaldar.
I think the mic is off.
I think, sir, Havaldar sir, can you switch on your mic again? I think it's showing that you're
Sir,
muted.
can you unmute yourself?
No, sorry.
No, you have.
I think on behalf of our Amity Institute of Liberal Arts, Dr. Havaldar, Dr. Alka Parikh ma'am, and everyone present here, our students, dear students, and faculty members, I would really like to thank Dr. Manoj Pant sir for sparing time in this difficult moment, which all of us are going through, and sharing a really intriguing and stimulating discussion that he has held, and the measures that he has suggested through his lecture are really thought-provoking and something which needs to be taken into serious consideration. And as Alka ma'am has also rightly put it, that most of the economic reformists have suggested in the similar line, and I hope the government and the policymakers bring such important changes into their policies, which can bring certain growth and some kind of movement in our economy. And something which is the best takeaway which I would like to take from this lecture is the fact that we need to get rid of this fear psychosis which has held in our mind about this pandemic creating a havoc in terms of whether we all are going to die or survive of this pandemic, and we just need to get to our normal daily routine. Otherwise, we all are going to die of something else than COVID-19. Thank you so much, Dr. Pant.
Thank you, Mr. Havaldar. Thank you, Shubham. And let's hope so in slightly better, maybe I'll finally make script that we've been trying to organize for quite some time.
In fact, I would also like to say, sir, that in future, we would like to have you in the university when we all set up into the normal routine.
Yeah.
You once did once or twice before, somehow something or the other happened and one was able to make it. But
Yes.
we'll do it one of these days. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks everyone for joining for this
Thank
session.
you. Thank you.